So in this video I'm going to go through some basic setup to work with Neovim. I used to be a long-time user of VS Code until 2 years ago when I started to feel like it's getting slower and it's getting harder to configure with all the plugins. And since I was working on a remote dev environment anyway, in most cases I had to install the plugins twice, one for the host and one for the remote. They started becoming a little bit confusing. So I switched to Vim initially, and when Vim couldn't do exactly what I wanted to do, I switched to Neovim. The differences between Vim and Neovim are few but important, and I guess the most important one is you can write plugins and configuration in Lua. So there's many ways to install Neovim. If you install it from your distro repositories, you usually get an older version. So I generally just manually download the zip file and manually moving all the files to the right place, which is not that hard to do, which I'm going to do just now. So I've already been to the GitHub, I went to releases and copied the URL of the gzip file. So now we have Neovim running. The next step is to create a configuration file. To be honest, I do some really basic configuration with Lua file basically that has all my configuration. So I'm going to create inside my config directory, which if it doesn't exist, you need to create it, a folder named Vim. And inside that, I'm going to create a file called init.vim. And then I'm going to create another folder called Lua, and then inside another folder called plugins. And finally there, say plugins, I'm going to create a file called init.lua. So at the moment we have a clean install of Neovim, and Neovim on its own is basically quite similar to Vim. Some people are fine with just that, but to be honest, most people that use Neovim are developers, and they need to configure the environment to be nice and easy to work with. So for that you need plugins. So most people go either with Vim plug or Packer. I go with Vim plug because I find it a lot easier to use. So we'll start by configuring Vim plug, which is done just by adding 2 lines. just like this. And between those lines, we can add any plugin we choose to add. So in these videos, I'm going to do a really basic setup, which is going to be language agnostic with just a few plugins I always tend to use, which they're really handy, they're really useful. So the first thing I'm going to add is Lua line, which is a status line, just like this one, just like it's customizable and you can add anything you want. And it will serve as a really good example. To be honest, if you haven't given Vim a try, it's not that hard, right? It took me just a few weeks to learn and a few more maybe to master. I know there's many memes out there about how to exit Vim and such things, but it's not that hard. At this point, we need to tell it that we have created the other folder called plugins, which we have the file. Now that I have Vim plugged installed, I'm just running Vim plug install. There goes and fetches the plugin. I have to say that these plugins are actually Git repositories. So you can go to that Git repository and see how the Lua line is configured. So anyway, even though we have installed a plugin, nothing has changed because we haven't activated basically the plugin. It needs setting up. So let's start really basic by not changing anything, just loading up the plugin. So this is simple requiring plugin, you just installed and calling setup. In this case, we'll use the default setup and see what will happen. You can see me doing something slowly in Neovim. That's because I haven't set up any shortcuts that I like yet, which we're going to do. So at the moment, I'm sometimes clicking the shortcuts I'm used to, they don't work, and then I go back to Neovim's default shortcuts. And here we have the default Lua line. This is fully customizable. And when we open a file, now we can see the name here, encoding and type. Looks nice.